The smell of garlic and rosemary filled Sarah Chen's kitchen as she put the finishing touches on the roast chicken. Outside, the September rain drummed against the windows of her modest two-story home in suburban Portland, Oregon. She glanced at the clock. 6:47 p.m. Her guests would arrive any minute for what she'd hoped would be a relaxing dinner with old friends. Sarah had moved to Portland 3 years ago for her job as a social worker, leaving behind the chaos of Los Angeles for something quieter, more manageable. Tonight's dinner was meant to be a celebration. Her promotion to senior case manager at the Multnomah County Family Services Office. She'd invited her college roommate Jessica and Jessica's husband Mark, along with her neighbors Tom and Linda Morrison, who'd become close friends since she'd moved to the Hawthorne district. The doorbell chimed, and Sarah smoothed her navy blue dress before answering. Jessica stood on the porch, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the rain, wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her, Mark held an umbrella, his tall frame imposing even in the dim porch light. "Sarah," Jessica's voice was bright, perhaps too bright. "Thank you so much for having us." Mark brought wine, that expensive Pinot you mentioned liking. Mark stepped forward, his handshake firm, almost crushing. "Congratulations on the promotion, Sarah. Jessica's been talking about this dinner all week." His smile was charming, the kind that probably worked well in his job as a pharmaceutical sales rep. As they settled into the living room, the Morrisons arrived. Tom, a retired teacher with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, shook off his raincoat while Linda, a petite woman who ran a local bookstore, immediately complimented Sarah's choice of music, soft jazz playing from the vintage record player in the corner. "This place always feels so cozy," Linda said, settling into the plush armchair near the fireplace. "You've really made it home, Sarah." The conversation flowed easily at first. Mark dominated much of the discussion, regaling them with stories from his recent business trips to Chicago and Denver. Jessica sat beside him on the couch, occasionally adding details or laughing at appropriate moments, but Sarah noticed how she seemed to choose her words carefully, glancing at Mark before speaking. "So, Jessica," Tom leaned forward with interest, "Sarah mentioned you're thinking about going back to school. What program were you considering?" Jessica's face lit up for the first time that evening. "Well, I've been looking into graphic design programs at Portland Community College. There's this amazing certificate program that..." "She's just exploring options," Mark interrupted smoothly, his hand finding Jessica's knee. "We haven't made any decisions yet, right, Jess?" The light in Jessica's eyes dimmed slightly. "Right, just exploring." Sarah felt a familiar unease in her stomach, the same feeling she got at work when something wasn't quite right with a family situation. She'd learned to trust that instinct over her 3 years in social work. Dinner was served in the dining room, where Sarah had set her grandmother's china and lit candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The conversation turned to local politics, with Tom and Linda discussing the upcoming city council elections. Mark shared his views on tax policy with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. "The problem with this city," Mark said, cutting his chicken with precise movements, "is that everyone's too concerned with being politically correct. Sometimes you need strong leadership that isn't afraid to make tough decisions. I think compassionate leadership is just as important as strong leadership," Sarah said carefully. "In my work, I see what happens when people in power abuse that authority." Mark's jaw tightened slightly. "Well, that's different. I'm talking about real leadership. Sometimes people need guidance, need someone to help them make better choices." Jessica reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. As she lifted it, she accidentally knocked over the small vase of flowers in the center of the table. Water spread across the tablecloth, and Jessica immediately began apologizing profusely. "Oh God, I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm such a klutz. Let me clean this up." "Jessica, it's fine," Sarah started to say, but Mark was already standing. "Jesus, Jess, can't you be more careful?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the warm atmosphere like a blade. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." Jessica's voice was getting smaller. "You never mean to." but you always do something." Mark's hand moved so quickly that for a moment Sarah thought he was reaching for napkins. The slap echoed in the sudden silence. Jessica's head snapped to the side, her hand flying to her cheek. The room froze. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched Jessica's eyes fill with tears that she immediately tried to blink away. Then Tom laughed. It was a nervous, uncomfortable sound, but it was definitely laughter. "Well, that's one way to handle a spill," he said, his voice strained with forced joviality. Linda giggled, a high-pitched sound that seemed to surprise even her. "Mark, you're terrible, poor Jessica." Mark's expression transformed instantly back into his charming smile. "She knows I'm just playing around, don't you, honey?" He leaned down and kissed the top of Jessica's head. "She's always been clumsy. Haven't you, Jess?" Jessica nodded quickly, forcing a smile that made Sarah's heart break. "I really am, always knocking things over." The conversation resumed as if nothing had happened. Tom began telling a story about his former students, and Linda started helping clean up the spilled water. Mark sat back down and continued eating, occasionally making jokes that everyone laughed at just a little too loudly. But Sarah couldn't move. She sat frozen in her chair, watching Jessica touch her cheek when she thought no one was looking, seeing how carefully she positioned herself to avoid bumping into anything else. She watched Mark's hand rest possessively on Jessica's shoulder, his thumb making small circles that looked tender but made Jessica tense. This was it. This was the moment Sarah had been trained for, had dedicated her career to recognizing. The difference was, this time it wasn't happening in a case file or during a home visit. This was happening in her own dining room, among people she considered friends. As dessert was served, a chocolate cake from the local bakery, Sarah made her decision. While the others were distracted by Mark's story about a client who'd tried to bribe him with season tickets to the Trailblazers, Sarah caught Jessica's eye and mouthed, "Bathroom." Jessica excused herself quietly, and Sarah followed a moment later. In the small powder room off the hallway, Jessica was staring at herself in the mirror, the red mark on her cheek clearly visible under the bright vanity lights. "Jessica," Sarah said softly, closing the door behind her. "It's not what you think," Jessica said immediately, not turning around. He didn't mean anything by it. He's under a lot of stress at work, and I really am clumsy. You saw how I knocked over Jess." Sarah moved to stand behind her friend, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "How long has this been happening?" Jessica's composure cracked slightly. "Sarah, please. It's complicated. It doesn't have to be." For a moment, Jessica's mask slipped completely. Her face crumpled, and she looked like the scared girl Sarah remembered from their college days, the one who'd called her crying after bad dates or failed exams. But then the mask snapped back into place. "We should get back. They'll wonder where we are." When they returned to the dining room, Mark was in the middle of explaining his theory about why small businesses fail, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. He glanced up as Jessica sat down, his eyes scanning her face briefly before returning to his story. The evening wound down with coffee and small talk about weekend plans. As the guests prepared to leave, Mark helped Jessica into her coat with what looked like attentiveness but felt like control. His hands lingered on her shoulders, his grip just a little too firm. "Thank you for a wonderful evening, Sarah," Jessica said, her voice back to its earlier brightness. "The dinner was perfect. We should do this again soon," Mark added, shaking Sarah's hand with that same crushing grip. "Maybe next time at our place." Sarah watched from her front window as Mark and Jessica walked to their car, a black BMW sedan parked under the streetlight. Even from a distance, she could see how Mark opened Jessica's door, but his hand was on her lower back, guiding her in a way that looked possessive rather than polite. After all the guests had left, Sarah stood in her kitchen, loading the dishwasher and trying to process what she'd witnessed. The red wine stain on her tablecloth seemed to glow under the overhead lights, a reminder of the violence that had been dismissed as normal, even amusing, by people she'd trusted. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Jessica's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button for several minutes before she finally typed a text instead. "Thank you for coming tonight. I'm here if you ever need to talk. About anything. Day or night." The response came back quickly. "Thanks. Had such a great time. Talk soon." But Sarah knew Jessica well enough to read between the lines. The exclamation points were trying too hard. The response was too quick, too cheerful for someone who'd been slapped at a dinner party. Sarah poured herself a glass of wine and sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. In her professional life, she had protocols, resources, legal frameworks to work within. But this was personal, and personal made everything more complicated. She thought about Mark's easy charm, the way he'd commanded the conversation all evening. She thought about Tom and Linda's laughter, their willingness to dismiss violence as humor. She thought about Jessica's careful words, her constant monitoring of Mark's reactions, and she thought about the scared girl in her bathroom mirror, the one who'd whispered, "It's complicated," as if that explained away the red mark on her cheek. Sarah opened her laptop and began researching. Domestic violence resources in Portland, safe houses, legal options, escape plans. She read until her eyes burned and the rain stopped drumming against her windows. By the time she finally went to bed, Sarah had made a decision. She couldn't force Jessica to leave, couldn't rescue someone who wasn't ready to be rescued, but she could be prepared for when that moment came. Because she was certain, with the sick certainty that came from years of professional experience, that it would come. 3 weeks passed before Sarah saw Jessica again. They'd exchanged a few text messages, casual check-ins that felt increasingly strained. Jessica had cancelled their planned coffee date twice, once citing a migraine, and once claiming Mark had surprised her with weekend plans to the coast. Sarah threw herself into her work, but found herself distracted during client meetings, seeing patterns she'd missed before. A woman who flinched when her caseworker moved too quickly. A man who answered every question directed at his wife. Children who went quiet when their father entered the room. It was during a particularly difficult case conference on a Thursday morning that Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Are you free for lunch? Need to get out of the house." They met at a small cafe on Hawthorne Boulevard, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Jessica arrived 10 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the overcast October sky. When she finally removed them, Sarah could see the faint yellow-green bruising around her left eye, carefully concealed with makeup. "I fell down the stairs," Jessica said before Sarah could ask. "Stupid, right? I was carrying laundry and missed the bottom step." Sarah nodded and ordered coffee for both of them, choosing a table in the back corner where they could speak privately. Jessica seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone and glancing toward the door. "How's work?" Sarah asked, settling into the weathered armchair across from her friend. "Good, good. Mark thinks I should wait before starting those classes, though. He's concerned about the cost, and with his promotion coming up." Jessica's voice trailed off as she stirred sugar into her coffee with mechanical precision. "What promotion? Oh, didn't I mention it? He's being considered for regional sales manager. It would mean more travel, but significantly more money. He says once he gets it, we can reassess my situation." Sarah noticed how Jessica referred to her education as "my situation," as if wanting to learn was a problem to be managed. "Jess, what do you want? Not what Mark wants. What do you want?" Jessica's spoon clinked against her mug as her stirring became more agitated. "It's not that simple, Sarah. Marriage is about compromise, about supporting each other's goals." "What about your goals?" "My goals?" Jessica laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I want Mark to be happy. I want us to be happy together. That's my goal." Sarah watched her friend's face, seeing the practiced way she deflected questions, the automatic responses that probably came from months or years of having her desires questioned or dismissed. "Do you remember freshman year?" Sarah asked suddenly. "When you declared your major in graphic design? You were so excited. You stayed up all night working on that first project, the poster for the campus environmental club. You said you wanted to use art to change people's minds about important issues." Jessica's eyes filled with tears, which she quickly blinked away. That was a long time ago. People change. Priorities change. Dreams don't have to die, though. Some dreams aren't practical. Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper, and some people aren't cut out for certain things. Mark helps me see that. He's practical. He helps me be more realistic about my limitations. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She recognized the language, the systematic erosion of self-worth that batterers use to maintain control, make the victim believe they're incapable, unworthy, lucky to be tolerated. Jessica, Sarah said carefully, you're one of the most talented, creative people I know. Remember the painting you did senior year? The one that won the student exhibition? You sold it for $800. Mark says talent isn't the same as ability to make a living. He says I'm being naive if I think I could actually succeed in a creative field. Jessica was shredding her napkin into small pieces as she spoke. He's probably right. I've always been too emotional, too impractical. Sarah wanted to scream. She wanted to grab Jessica by the shoulders and shake her, make her see what was happening. Instead, she reached across the table and gently placed her hand over Jessica's. You're not too emotional. You're not too anything. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. Jessica looked up, and for a moment Sarah saw a flash of the girl she used to know, fierce, creative, unafraid to take up space in the world. But then Jessica's phone buzzed, and the moment was gone. That's Mark, Jessica said, checking the message. He's wondering where I am. I told him I was grocery shopping. She started gathering her things, suddenly urgent. I should go. Jess, wait. Sarah pulled out a piece of paper from her purse. A business card for the Portland Women's Crisis Line that she'd been carrying for weeks. Just in case you ever need someone to talk to. Someone who understands. Jessica stared at the card for a long moment before quickly slipping it into her jacket pocket. I should really go. Sarah watched her friend hurry out of the cafe, noting how Jessica checked her reflection in the window, adjusting her makeup to ensure the bruising was properly concealed. That evening, Sarah couldn't concentrate on the case files spread across her kitchen table. She kept thinking about Jessica's words, about dreams being impractical and people having limitations. She'd heard similar language from dozens of abuse victims over the years, but hearing it from someone she cared about made it feel fresh and devastating. Her phone rang around 9 o'clock. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah answered immediately. Sarah? Jessica's voice was shaky. I'm sorry to call so late. It's not late. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. I wanted to thank you for lunch today and to apologize if I seemed distracted. I've been under a lot of stress lately. Sarah could hear music in the background, the kind of smooth jazz Mark had played during the dinner party. Where are you? Home. Mark made dinner. Salmon with that sauce I like. He felt bad about being so busy with work lately, so he wanted to do something nice. Jessica's tone was carefully upbeat, but Sarah detected an undercurrent of something else. Relief? Fear? He's been really sweet tonight. Sarah recognized the pattern. The cycle of abuse that her training had taught her about. Tension building, explosion, honeymoon period, repeat. Jessica was in the honeymoon phase, grateful for kindness that should have been baseline behavior. That's nice, Sarah said carefully. How are you feeling? Better. Much better. Mark and I talked, and he helped me understand some things. About priorities. About what's really important in a relationship. Jessica paused, and Sarah heard Mark's voice in the background, though he couldn't make out the words. He's right that I sometimes get carried away with impractical ideas. It's good that he keeps me grounded. Sarah bit her tongue to keep from responding. She knew that anything she said would likely be reported back to Mark, and that could make things worse for Jessica. Well, I'm glad you're feeling better, Sarah. Jessica's voice dropped to almost a whisper. You're a good friend. I'm lucky to have you. The line went dead. Sarah sat staring at her phone for several minutes, then opened her laptop and began typing an email to her supervisor. She needed to take some time off, needed to research resources, needed to prepare for what she increasingly felt was inevitable. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah threw herself into learning everything she could about domestic violence resources in Portland. She visited the Bradley Angle House, a transitional housing facility for abuse survivors. She spoke with counselors at the Portland Women's Crisis Line, volunteering to help with their weekend hotline shifts. She researched legal procedures for restraining orders, safe deposit box rentals, and apartment hunting assistance. She also began documenting everything: the date of the dinner party, Jessica's appearance at lunch, the phone call. She took photos of the wine stain on her tablecloth, knowing it might seem insignificant, but understanding that in domestic violence cases, every piece of evidence could matter. Meanwhile, Jessica's texts became increasingly infrequent and increasingly cheerful. Photos of flowers Mark had brought home, updates about his work successes, messages about how happy they were, how grateful she felt to have such a supportive husband. Sarah recognized the signs of an abused woman trying to convince herself and others that everything was fine. The more perfect the relationship appeared from the outside, the more dangerous it probably was behind closed doors. It was during her 3rd volunteer shift at the crisis hotline that Sarah got the call she'd been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Portland Women's Crisis Line, this is Sarah. Silence on the other end, except for the sound of quiet crying. Hello, are you there? You're safe. Take your time. Sarah, the voice was barely audible. Jessica, I don't know what to do. Sarah's training kicked in, overriding her personal emotions. Are you safe right now? Are you somewhere where you can talk? He's asleep. I'm in the bathroom. Sarah, I think he might really hurt me this time. What happened? Jessica's words came out in a rush, whispered and broken. He found the card you gave me, the crisis line card. He was doing laundry and it fell out of my pocket. He was so angry, Sarah. He said I was betraying him, talking about our private business with strangers. He said if I was unhappy, I should tell him, not go crying to my friends. Did he hurt you? A long pause. He shook me, hard, and he said that if I ever called that number, if I ever made him look bad, he would make sure I regretted it. The way he said it, Sarah, his eyes, I've never seen him like that before. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back her own tears. Jessica, I need you to listen to me. You did nothing wrong, nothing. Do you understand? I shouldn't have kept the card. I knew it would make him angry. No, stop. His anger is not your responsibility. His choices are not your fault. Sarah heard a sound in the background, a door creaking. I have to go, Jessica whispered urgently. He's up. Jessica, wait. If you need to leave quickly, if you're ever in immediate danger, call 911. But if you need help planning, if you need resources, call me, day or night. I'll be ready. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering, I'm here. The line went dead again, but this time Sarah felt different. Jessica had reached out. She'd acknowledged the danger. It was the first step, and it meant that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to start thinking about escape. Sarah spent the rest of her shift researching emergency procedures, safe house availability, and rapid relocation protocols. When she got home, she began making lists. What Jessica would need, where they could go, who could help. She didn't know when the call would come, but she was certain it would. And when it did, she would be ready. Thanksgiving week arrived grey and cold, with Portland's typical November drizzle turning the streets slick and reflective. Sarah had volunteered to work the holiday weekend at Family Services, knowing that domestic violence incidents often spiked during family gatherings and forced togetherness. She hadn't heard from Jessica in over a week, not since the crisis line call. Sarah had sent a few casual texts, photos of her neighbor's cat, a link to an article about graphic design trends, but had received only brief, overly cheerful responses, the kind of responses that suggested someone was monitoring the conversation. On Wednesday evening, as Sarah was preparing a modest Thanksgiving dinner for herself and her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, her phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah answered immediately. Sarah, hi. Jessica's voice was artificially bright, with that strained quality Sarah had learned to recognize. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Not at all. How are you? Oh, wonderful. We're having such a nice holiday. Mark's parents came up from Sacramento, and his sister and her family are here too. It's a full house. Jessica laughed, but it sounded forced. We're making traditional Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. Turkey, stuffing, the works. Sarah could hear voices in the background, the sounds of family gathering. But there was something in Jessica's tone that set off alarm bells. That sounds lovely. How are you doing with all the hosting? Fine, fine. You know how much I love entertaining. Another laugh, more strained than the last. Mark's been so helpful with all the preparations. He's such a perfectionist about details, making sure everything is just right. The emphasis on perfectionist and just right made Sarah's stomach tighten. She'd learned to listen for coded language from abuse victims, especially when they weren't free to speak openly. Jess, is everything okay? You sound a little stressed. Stressed? No, not at all. Just busy, lots to coordinate. Jessica paused, and Sarah heard a male voice in the background, Mark, speaking in low, urgent tones. Actually, Sarah, I should probably go. Still lots to prepare for tomorrow. Of course. But Jess, I'm here if you need anything at all. I know, thank you. You're such a good friend. After the call ended, Sarah sat staring at her phone, that familiar knot of worry tightening in her chest. She'd handled enough crisis situations to recognize the signs of someone operating under intense pressure, trying to maintain normalcy while walking on eggshells. Thanksgiving Day passed quietly for Sarah. She shared dinner with Mrs. Patterson, a retired librarian who regaled her with stories about Portland in the 1960s. But throughout the day, Sarah found herself checking her phone constantly, waiting for a call or text that never came. Friday morning, Sarah woke to the sound of rain pounding against her bedroom windows. She'd planned to spend the day reading and maybe taking a walk if the weather cleared, but at 11:30 a.m., her phone rang. Sarah? Jessica's voice was barely above a whisper, and there was no pretense of cheerfulness this time. I'm here. What's wrong? Can you come get me? Please? I'm at Laurelhurst Park by the pond. I walked here, but I can't go back. Sarah was already reaching for her car keys. I'm on my way. Stay where you are. Are you hurt? Not badly. Just please hurry. Sarah drove through the rain-soaked streets faster than she should have, her windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. Laurelhurst Park was only 10 minutes from her house, but it felt like an eternity. She found Jessica sitting on a bench near the duck pond, soaked through despite the covered pavilion nearby. She was wearing jeans and a thin sweater, no coat, and her hair was plastered to her head. When she looked up at Sarah's approach, the full extent of the damage was visible. Jessica's lip was split and swollen. A dark bruise spread across her left cheekbone, and there were finger-shaped marks on her neck. Her right wrist was swollen, and she held it carefully against her body. Oh, honey, Sarah breathed, sitting beside her on the wet bench. What happened? Jessica started crying then, great shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Sarah wrapped her arms around her friend, feeling how Jessica flinched at first contact before melting into the embrace. His family, Jessica whispered against Sarah's shoulder. They were all there, and I was trying so hard to make everything perfect. The turkey was taking longer than expected, and Mark was getting agitated because his father kept asking when dinner would be ready. Sarah rubbed Jessica's back, letting her talk at her own pace. I suggested maybe we could serve appetizers to hold everyone over, and Mark just snapped in front of everyone. He said I was making excuses, that I should have planned better, that I was embarrassing him in front of his family. Jessica pulled back, wiping her nose with her sleeve. His sister tried to defend me, said it was just dinner, no big deal. And that made him even angrier. He said his family didn't understand how difficult I could be, how I always found ways to mess things up. What about the bruises, Jess? These aren't from words. Jessica touched her face gingerly. After everyone left last night, he said we needed to talk. He was so calm, Sarah. That's what scared me most. He wasn't yelling or throwing things. He was just cold. Ooh, she took a shuddering breath. He said I'd humiliated him, made him look bad in front of his family. He said I needed to learn to think before I acted, to consider how my actions affected him. Sarah felt sick, but she kept her expression neutral, letting Jessica continue. He made me stand in the kitchen while he explained all the ways I'd failed as a wife yesterday. Every mistake, every imperfection. And then he said I needed to understand consequences, that words clearly weren't enough to get through to me. Jessica's voice became mechanical, detached. He hit me with the back of his hand first, said it was to get my attention. Then he grabbed my throat and told me that if I ever embarrassed him like that again, especially in front of his family, there would be serious consequences. Sarah's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to remain calm. How did you get away? He left this morning to play golf with his father, said he'd be back around 2 and expected me to have the house cleaned up and lunch ready. I started cleaning and I couldn't do it anymore, Sarah. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Jessica met Sarah's eyes for the first time. I walked out. I didn't take anything except my phone. I just walked out and kept walking until I got here. Sarah checked her watch. 12:45 p.m. They didn't have much time. Jess, listen to me. You did the right thing. You saved yourself. But we need to move fast, okay? Can you think clearly enough to help me help you? Jessica nodded, some strength returning to her voice. What do we need to do? First, medical attention. Some of these injuries need to be documented, and your wrist might be broken. Then we need to get you somewhere safe and figure out next steps. Sarah helped Jessica to her feet, noticing how she favored her right side. Do you want to file a police report? Jessica hesitated. I don't know. Mark will say I'm lying, making things up. He's so good with people, so charming. And there were witnesses yesterday who saw me mess up dinner. Jessica. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face her friend. Listen to me. You did not mess up dinner. You did not deserve what happened to you. You are not responsible for his violence. Do you understand? Jessica's eyes filled with tears again. I know that intellectually. But Sarah, you don't understand how he makes everything seem like my fault. How he explains things until I can't tell what's real anymore. That's called gaslighting. And it's a form of psychological abuse. What you're feeling right now, that confusion, that self-doubt, it's not permanent. Your mind will clear once you're away from him. They reached Sarah's car and she helped Jessica into the passenger seat, adjusting the heat to combat her shivering. Where are we going? Jessica asked as Sarah started the engine. First, the hospital. Then, if you're ready, somewhere safe where you can think clearly and make decisions about what you want to do next. As they drove through the rain toward OHSU Hospital, Sarah made a mental inventory of everything they would need to do. Medical documentation, police report if Jessica decided to file one, restraining order, safe housing. Eventually, they'd need to retrieve Jessica's belongings, but that could wait. Sarah, Jessica's voice was small. What if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm overreacting? Sarah glanced at her friend's battered face, at the way she cradled her injured wrist. Jess, look in the mirror. Look at what he did to you. That's not an overreaction, that's survival. Jessica was quiet for a moment. He'll come looking for me. I know, but you don't have to face that alone. I don't have anywhere to go. All our accounts are joint accounts. The car is in his name. Even my phone is on his plan. We'll figure it out, one step at a time. At the hospital, the intake nurse took one look at Jessica's injuries and immediately began the protocol for domestic violence cases. Sarah watched as Jessica answered questions with growing strength, as she allowed photographs to be taken of her injuries, as she slowly began to reclaim her own story. Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, confirmed that Jessica's wrist was fractured and would need a cast. The finger marks on her neck were consistent with strangulation, which in Oregon was a felony assault charge. Ms. Wells, Dr. Martinez said gently, I need you to understand that strangulation is one of the strongest predictors of homicide in domestic violence cases. What happened to you represents a significant escalation in violence." Jessica went pale. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sarah interjected, "that leaving was the right choice, and it means we need to take every precaution to keep you safe." As Jessica's wrist was being casted, Sarah stepped into the hallway and made several phone calls. First, to the Portland Women's Crisis Line, arranging emergency housing. Then to her supervisor, requesting emergency family leave. Finally, to a colleague who specialized in domestic violence cases, asking for a referral to the best family law attorney in the city. When she returned to Jessica's room, her friend was staring out the window at the rain, her left arm now encased in a blue fiberglass cast. "I keep thinking about the dinner party," Jessica said without turning around. "How Tom and Linda laughed when Mark hit me. How normal everyone acted, like it was just part of who we were as a couple." "People don't want to see abuse," Sarah said. "It makes them uncomfortable, so they minimize it, rationalize it, pretend it's not happening. That doesn't make it okay." Jessica turned to face her. "I believed them. I thought I was being too sensitive, making a big deal out of nothing. You were being exactly as sensitive as you should be. Violence is a big deal. It's never nothing." The social worker assigned to Jessica's case arrived with discharge paperwork and information about emergency resources. Jessica would stay at a transitional housing facility for now, where she could receive counseling and legal assistance while planning her next steps. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Jessica grabbed Sarah's hand with her uninjured one. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" Sarah thought about all the cases she'd handled over the years, all the women she'd tried to help who weren't ready to leave, who'd gone back to their abusers despite all the resources and support available. She thought about the dinner party, about sitting frozen while her friend was assaulted in front of guests who laughed it off. "Because you're my friend," she said simply, "and because everyone deserves to live without fear." Jessica squeezed her hand. "I'm scared." "I know. But you're also brave. You walked away, Jess. You saved your own life today." As they drove through the rain toward the safe house, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and dread. Jessica was safe for now, but Sarah knew the most dangerous time for an abuse victim was often right after they left. Mark would be returning home soon to find Jessica gone, and his reaction would be unpredictable. The Bradley Angle house sat on a quiet residential street in southeast Portland, indistinguishable from the other modest homes around it. The anonymity was intentional, safety through invisibility. Sarah helped Jessica from the car, noting how her friend moved carefully, every gesture deliberate and measured. Maria Santos, the intake coordinator, met them at the door. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, she radiated the calm competence that came from years of crisis. "Work. Jessica, I'm Maria. Welcome. You're safe here." Her voice was warm but professional. "Sarah, thank you for bringing her. We'll take good care of her." Sarah hugged Jessica goodbye, promising to check in the next day. As she drove home through the darkening afternoon, her phone rang constantly, Mark calling Jessica's number over and over. Sarah had forgotten that Jessica's phone was still linked to Mark's family plan, which meant he could track its location. She immediately called the safe house. "Maria, it's Sarah, Jessica's phone. Her husband can track it. You need to turn it off immediately." "Already done," Maria replied. "Standard protocol. We've got her phone in a Faraday bag and we'll help her get a new number tomorrow." That evening, Sarah sat in her living room trying to focus on a book, but her mind kept wandering to Jessica. Every car that drove past her house made her tense. Every unexpected sound had her checking the locks on her doors. Around 9 p.m., her doorbell rang. Sarah peered through the peephole and saw Mark standing on her porch, still in his golf clothes but now wrinkled and damp from the rain. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and even through the distorted view of the peephole, she could see the barely controlled fury in his posture. She didn't answer. Mark rang the bell again, then knocked hard enough to rattle the doorframe. "Sarah, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Sarah remained silent, her heart pounding. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, keeping her finger hovering over the send button. "Sarah, please. I'm worried about Jessica. She's been acting strange lately, and I think she might be having some kind of breakdown. Her family has a history of mental illness, you know. I just want to make sure she's getting the help she needs. The manipulation was textbook, painting the victim as mentally unstable while positioning himself as the concerned husband. Sarah had heard variations of this story dozens of times in her professional life. Mark's voice took on a pleading tone. I know she might have said some things that made me look bad. She gets confused when she's stressed, makes up stories. But I love her, Sarah. I just want to bring her home, where she belongs. When Sarah still didn't respond, Mark's composure began to crack. I know you took her somewhere. Her phone last pinged near your house. His voice was getting louder, more aggressive. You don't understand the situation, Sarah. You don't know Jessica like I do. She needs structure, needs someone to take care of her. Without me, she'll fall apart. Sarah heard him try the door handle, and she quickly engaged the deadbolt she'd already locked. God damn it, Sarah! Open this door. You're interfering in my marriage, and I won't stand for it. That was when Sarah pressed send, connecting to 911. 911, what's your emergency? I have a man at my door who's threatening me. He's the husband of a domestic violence victim, and he's trying to find her location. Are you in immediate danger, ma'am? Sarah could still hear Mark outside, his voice alternating between pleading and threatening. I think so. He's becoming increasingly agitated. We're sending units to your location now. Stay on the line with me. The police arrived within 5 minutes, their red and blue lights painting Sarah's front yard in alternating colors. Sarah watched through her window as 2 officers approached Mark, who immediately transformed back into his charming public persona. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see Mark's body language, open, friendly, concerned. He gestured towards Sarah's house with what looked like worried confusion, as if he couldn't understand why she wouldn't help a concerned husband find his missing wife. One of the officers came to Sarah's door while his partner continued talking with Mark. Ma'am, I'm Officer Thompson. Can you tell me what happened here? Sarah opened the door, but kept the chain engaged. That man's wife left him today after he severely beat her. She's in protective custody at an undisclosed location. He came here demanding that I tell him where she is. Did he threaten you directly? He tried to force entry and made it clear he wouldn't leave until I gave him information about his wife's location. Officer, this man is dangerous. His wife is at the hospital being treated for a fractured wrist and strangulation injuries. Officer Thompson made notes in his pad. We're going to ask him to leave the premises. Do you want to file a harassment report? Yes. And officer, please make sure it's noted that this involves an active domestic violence case. His wife may be filing charges tomorrow. After the police left with Mark, Sarah called the safe house to warn them about the incident. Maria assured her that security protocols were in place and that Jessica was safe. How is she doing? Sarah asked. As well as can be expected. She's scared, but she's also determined. She met with our counselor for an hour this evening, and she's already asking about next steps, legal options, housing, job training. That's a good sign. That night, Sarah barely slept. Every sound outside her house made her alert. Every car engine had her checking the windows. She understood now why domestic violence advocates often became targets themselves. They represented a threat to the abuser's control. Saturday morning brought more rain and a text from Jessica sent from a new phone number. Thank you for everything. Feeling stronger today. Meeting with lawyer Monday. We'll call you later. Sarah felt a wave of relief. Jessica was safe, and more importantly, she was taking control of her situation. Over the weekend, Sarah researched everything she could about the legal process Jessica would face. Oregon had strong domestic violence laws, but prosecution would depend on Jessica's willingness to testify and the physical evidence documented at the hospital. She also looked into practical matters: apartment hunting assistance, job placement services, financial aid for returning students. If Jessica decided to pursue her graphic design education, there were resources available to help domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives. Monday morning, Sarah returned to work but found it difficult to concentrate. Her supervisor, Dr. Chen, called her into his office around noon. "Sarah, I heard about the incident Friday night. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, just worried about my friend." Dr. Chen nodded. "I want you to know that the department supports what you did, but I also want to make sure you understand the risks. Domestic violence cases can be unpredictable, and perpetrators sometimes target advocates." "I understand. I'm assigning you a different caseload for the next few weeks, one that doesn't involve domestic violence cases. Consider it a precautionary measure." Sarah wanted to argue, but she knew Dr. Chen was right. She needed some distance from professional domestic violence work while supporting Jessica through her personal crisis. That afternoon, Jessica called from the legal aid office. "Sarah, I did it. I filed a police report and requested a restraining order. The attorney says we have a strong case for assault charges." "How do you feel?" "Terrified," Jessica admitted, "but also free, like I can breathe for the first time in months. The counselor here helped me understand that what Mark did wasn't normal, wasn't my fault." "What's next?" "I have a court hearing Thursday for the restraining order. The lawyer says Mark will be served with papers tomorrow, which means he'll officially know I'm not coming back." Sarah felt a chill. "Jess, you need to be extra careful this week. When abusers realize they've lost control, they sometimes escalate." "I know. But Sarah, I can't live in fear forever. At some point I have to start living again." That evening, Sarah got a call from Maria at the safe house. "Sarah, we had an incident today. Someone called claiming to be Jessica's sister, saying there was a family emergency and asking for Jessica's location. We don't give out information under any circumstances, but I wanted you to know. Mark doesn't have a sister-in-law who would call," Sarah said immediately. "Jessica's an only child. That's what we figured. We've increased security protocols and reminded all staff about information security." Sarah hung up, feeling uneasy. Mark was escalating, becoming more desperate in his attempts to locate Jessica. The restraining order would only make him more determined. Wednesday night, Sarah was awakened by her phone ringing at 2:47 a.m. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah?" Jessica's voice was shaky. "I'm sorry to wake you, but I needed to hear a friendly voice." "What's wrong?" "Mark was served with the restraining order today. His attorney called my attorney and made some kind of threat about fighting the charges, claiming I was mentally unstable and making false accusations." Sarah sat up in bed, fully alert. "That's just legal posturing, Jess. Your attorney expected that." "I know, but Sarah, what if people believe him? What if they think I'm crazy? Mark is so convincing, so charming. What if the judge believes his version instead of mine?" "Jessica, listen to me. You have medical documentation. You have photographs. You have a witness, me, who saw him hit you at the dinner party. You have a record of his harassment at my house. This isn't just your word against his anymore." Jessica was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about Tom and Linda laughing, about how normal everyone thought it was. Tom and Linda were wrong. Their reaction was about their discomfort, not about the reality of what happened. The judge won't be looking to minimize or explain away violence. The judge will be looking at evidence. The hearing is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Will you come with me?" "Of course." Thursday dawned clear and cold, with the kind of sharp winter light that made everything look crisp and defined. Sarah picked Jessica up from the safe house, noting how different her friend looked after just 6 days away from Mark. The bruising on her face was fading to yellow-green, but more importantly, she sat straighter, spoke more clearly, made direct eye contact. At the courthouse, they met with Jessica's attorney, Linda Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s who specialized in domestic violence cases. "Jessica, I want to prepare you for what might happen in there," Linda said, as they sat in the hallway outside the courtroom. "Mark will be present with his attorney. His strategy will likely be to paint you as unstable, vindictive, or both. Don't react to anything he says, just answer the questions honestly and let the evidence speak for itself." When their case was called, Sarah watched Mark enter the courtroom. He looked impeccable, expensive suit, fresh haircut, the very picture of a successful businessman wrongly accused, but Sarah noticed the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Mark's attorney argued that Jessica was having a mental health crisis, that she'd become increasingly paranoid and delusional in recent months, and that she was fabricating abuse allegations as revenge for Mark's success at work. "Your Honor," Mark's attorney said, "my client is concerned about his wife's well-being. He believes she's been influenced by well-meaning but misguided friends who have convinced her that normal marital disagreements constitute abuse." When it was Jessica's turn to testify, her voice was steady and clear. She described the dinner party incident, the escalating control over her education and finances, and the assault on Thanksgiving night. She showed the court her cast, the photos of her injuries, the documentation from the hospital. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said, addressing Mark directly, "do you deny striking your wife at a dinner party in September?" Mark's composure slipped slightly. "Your Honor, it was a playful gesture. Jessica can be dramatic sometimes, and our friends understood that it was just marital banter. Marital banter that left visible marks on her face. I may have been a little rough, but it wasn't intended to cause harm. Jessica bruises easily, and she tends to exaggerate minor incidents." Sarah watched the judge's expression change. She'd clearly heard enough. "Mr. Morrison, I'm granting the restraining order for a period of 1 year. You are to have no contact with Mrs. Morrison, directly or indirectly. You are not to come within 500 feet of her residence, workplace, or known locations. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." As they left the courthouse, Jessica was quiet until they reached Sarah's car. "I did it," she said, almost to herself. "I actually did it." "You did more than that, Jess. You took your life back." That evening, as Sarah and Jessica sat in a coffee shop near the safe house, Jessica pulled out a brochure for Portland Community College's graphic design program. "I called them today," she said. "Classes start in January. I can apply for financial aid, and the domestic violence advocate at the college says there are special programs for survivors returning to school." Sarah smiled. "What made you decide?" "Sitting in that courtroom today, telling my story, having the judge believe me, I realized that I get to decide what happens next. For the first time in years, I get to choose." Jessica looked out the window at the evening rain, then back at Sarah. "I'm still scared. Mark won't just disappear because of a piece of paper, but I'm more determined than scared now." "That's the difference between surviving and healing," Sarah said. "You're not just getting away from him anymore. You're moving towards something you want." As the week ended, Sarah reflected on how quickly everything had changed. 6 days ago, Jessica had been trapped in an abusive marriage, isolated and controlled. Now she had legal protection, safe housing, and a plan for rebuilding her life. But Sarah also knew this was just the beginning. The real work, healing from trauma, rebuilding self-worth, creating a new life, would take much longer. And Mark would likely continue to find ways to intimidate and control, even from a distance. Still, watching Jessica study the college brochure with genuine excitement, Sarah felt hopeful. Jessica had found her strength again, had remembered who she was beneath all the manipulation and control. The hardest part was over. Jessica had chosen herself. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of a small studio apartment in the Alberta Arts District, watching Jessica hang her first piece of artwork since college, a vibrant, abstract painting she'd created in her trauma recovery art therapy class. "It's perfect there," Sarah said, admiring how the blues and greens seemed to capture both turbulence and peace. Jessica stepped back, adjusting the frame slightly. "I never thought I'd paint again. For so long, Mark convinced me I wasn't really artistic, that it was just a hobby I needed to outgrow." The apartment was small but bright, with large windows that let in the February afternoon light. Jessica had furnished it simply: a comfortable reading chair from Goodwill, a small dining table where she did her homework, and an easel set up in the corner where the light was best. It wasn't much, but it was entirely hers. "How are classes going?" Sarah asked, settling into the reading chair while Jessica made tea in the tiny kitchen. Challenging, but good. Really good. Jessica's voice carried an enthusiasm that Sarah hadn't heard in years. Professor Martinez says I have a natural eye for color composition. She's encouraging me to apply for the advanced certificate program next year. Jessica brought over 2 mugs of chamomile tea and sat cross-legged on her bed, which doubled as a couch during the day. The casual posture was new. For years, Sarah had watched Jessica sit carefully, formally, always aware of taking up too little space. What about the other stuff? The legal situation? Jessica's expression grew more serious. Mark violated the restraining order twice in January. Once he showed up at the college, and once he had flowers delivered to my apartment somehow. His attorney convinced the judge both incidents were misunderstandings, but my attorney says if it happens again, he'll actually face jail time. Sarah frowned. How did he find your apartment? I'm not sure. I've been so careful about my address, but somehow... Jessica shrugged. Linda thinks he might have hired a private investigator. The good news is that each violation makes the permanent restraining order more likely to be approved. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, drinking tea and watching the neighborhood come alive outside Jessica's windows. The Alberta district was gentrifying rapidly, but it still retained its artistic character. Galleries mixed with coffee shops, young families alongside longtime residents, murals decorating building walls. Jess, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever miss it? The marriage, I mean. The security of being part of a couple? Jessica considered the question carefully. I miss the fantasy of what I thought my marriage was. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere, like I had my life figured out. But I don't miss walking on eggshells every day. I don't miss second-guessing everything I said or did. She pulled a throw pillow into her lap, hugging it loosely. The therapist at the safe house helped me understand that I was grieving the loss of the relationship I thought I had, not the relationship I actually had. That made it easier to let go. That's really insightful. Trauma therapy is intense, but it's helping me understand patterns I never recognized before. Like how I've always been attracted to people who seemed confident and decisive, but I never questioned whether they were controlling. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled. That's Claire, my study partner from graphic design class. We're meeting later to work on our final projects together. Sarah noticed the genuine warmth in Jessica's voice when she mentioned Claire. You've made friends at school? A few. It's weird, making friends as an adult, but also wonderful. Claire's divorced and Marcus, he's in my color theory class, is a single dad going back to school after a career change. We all understand what it's like to be starting over. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting long shadows across the apartment. Sarah had watched dozens of domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives over the years, but seeing it happen with someone she cared about personally felt different, more miraculous somehow. Sarah, I need to tell you something, Jessica said, setting down her tea mug. I've been thinking about what I want to do after I finish the graphic design program. Oh? I want to work with organizations that help domestic violence survivors. Maybe design materials for shelters, or help create websites and promotional materials for advocacy groups. I want to use my art to help other women tell their stories. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Jess, that's amazing. I know it sounds idealistic, but I keep thinking about how isolated I felt, how I thought I was the only one going through something like this. If I can create visuals that help other women recognize abuse, or resources that make it easier for them to get help. It doesn't sound idealistic at all. It sounds like purpose. Jessica nodded. The counselor says that finding meaning in our experiences is part of healing. I'm never going to be grateful that Mark hurt me, but I can be grateful for the strength I found in leaving him. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Jessica tensed immediately, her body going rigid with learned fear. It's okay, Sarah said quietly. Check who it is before you open it. Jessica looked through the peephole and relaxed. It's Claire. Claire turned out to be a woman in her early 30s with short, curly hair and paint-stained fingers. She greeted Jessica with a warm hug and shook Sarah's hand with genuine friendliness. "You must be the famous Sarah," Claire said. "Jess talks about you all the time, how you helped her through the worst period of her life." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the credit. Jessica saved herself. "I just happened to be there when she was ready." "That's not true," Jessica said firmly. "Sarah, you literally saved my life. When I called you from the park that day, I didn't know if I had the strength to keep going. But you showed up and you knew exactly what to do. And you never made me feel weak or stupid for staying as long as I did." Claire nodded knowingly. "That's rare. Most people want to know why you didn't leave sooner, like it's a simple choice." "You have experience with this?" Sarah asked gently. "My ex-husband. Different situation than Jess's, but the leaving part is the same. It's terrifying and liberating and overwhelming all at once." Sarah understood now why Jessica had connected with Claire. Shared experience created bonds that were difficult to explain to people who hadn't lived through similar trauma. "I should probably head home," Sarah said, gathering her coat. "Let you two work on your projects." As she prepared to leave, Jessica hugged her tightly. "Thank you for checking on me. For everything. You don't need to thank me anymore, Jess. We're just friends now, okay? Friends who happen to have been through something intense together." Driving home through the early evening traffic, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that terrible dinner party in September. Jessica was not the same woman who had sat quietly while her husband slapped her in front of friends. She was stronger, more self-aware, more connected to her own desires and goals. But the change in Sarah had been almost as dramatic. Working with Jessica through the crisis had reminded her why she'd chosen social work in the first place, not just to process cases and file reports, but to witness human resilience, to be present for moments of transformation. 2 weeks later, Sarah received an invitation in the mail, hand-designed and printed by Jessica, to attend the Portland Community College Student Art Show. Jessica's piece was titled "Breaking Point, Breaking Free" and consisted of 2 panels, one showing a figure trapped behind dark, jagged lines, and another showing the same figure emerging into bright, flowing colors. At the art show, Sarah watched Jessica explain her work to viewers, her voice confident and clear as she talked about using art to process trauma and healing. A representative from the Portland Women's Crisis Line was there, and Sarah overheard her asking Jessica about possible collaboration on educational materials. "I can't pay much," the woman was saying, "but if you're interested in working with us on some design projects..." "I'm very interested," Jessica replied immediately. "I want my work to make a difference." Later, as they walked through the gallery together, Jessica stopped in front of another student's photograph, a powerful black and white image of hands breaking through water. "You know what's strange?" Jessica said. 6 months ago, I would have been too intimidated to even come to something like this. Mark always said art shows were pretentious, that I wouldn't fit in. How does it feel to be here now? Like I belong, like this is where I was always supposed to be." As spring arrived in Portland, Sarah began to see Jessica less frequently. But their friendship had evolved into something sustainable and healthy. Jessica was building a full life: school, new friendships, advocacy work, art. She no longer needed intensive support. She needed what any friend needs: someone to celebrate successes with, someone to call when life got complicated, someone who knew her story but didn't define her by it. In May, Jessica called with news that the domestic violence prosecution against Mark had been successful. He'd been convicted of assault and sentenced to anger management classes, community service, and 2 years of probation. More importantly, the conviction meant the permanent restraining order would be approved. "How do you feel about it?" Sarah asked. "Relieved mostly, and proud that I followed through with the legal process. A year ago, I would never have believed I was strong enough to testify in court. Any regrets?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "I regret how long it took me to recognize what was happening. I regret the friends I lost because I was too ashamed to tell them the truth. But I don't regret leaving, and I don't regret seeking help." In June, Sarah attended Jessica's graduation from the graphic design program. Jessica's parents had flown in from Ohio, their first visit since the divorce proceedings began. Sarah watched Jessica walk across the stage to receive her certificate, remembering the scared woman who'd called her from a crisis line 6 months earlier. At the graduation party, Jessica threw in her apartment, now decorated with several of her own artworks and filled with her new friends from school. Sarah found herself in conversation with Jessica's mother. "I need to thank you," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "When Jessica first told us what Mark had been doing, I'm ashamed to say I encouraged her to try marriage counseling, to work things out. I didn't understand how dangerous he was." "It's hard to understand from the outside," Sarah replied. "Even professionals miss signs sometimes. Jessica says you probably saved her life." Sarah looked across the room at Jessica, who was laughing with Claire and Marcus about something that had happened in their final class. She looked radiant, not the artificial brightness she'd worn during her marriage, but genuine joy. "She saved her own life," Sarah said. "I just helped her remember she was worth saving." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Jessica pulled Sarah aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing Sarah a small wrapped package. Inside was a framed sketch, a simple but beautiful drawing of 2 figures, one reaching out to help the other climb out of a dark space. "It's called friendship," Jessica explained. "I know it's not much, but I wanted you to have something that represented what you mean to me." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "Jess, it's perfect. Sarah, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think I'll ever stop being afraid that he'll come back? That he'll find a way to hurt me again?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think the hypervigilance will fade over time, but some awareness will probably always be there. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's your survival instinct protecting you. The difference is that now you trust yourself to handle whatever comes." Jessica nodded. "That's what my therapist says too. That healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means integrating the experience in a way that makes you stronger." 6 months later, in December, Sarah received a holiday card designed by Jessica, her first freelance project for the Portland Women's Crisis Line. The card featured an image of a tree with deep roots and spreading branches, with the text, "Growth requires both strong roots and room to reach toward the light." Inside, Jessica had written a personal note. "Sarah, 1 year ago, I was convinced I was worthless, that I deserved whatever happened to me, that I had no choices. Today, I'm running my own small design business. I'm in a healthy relationship with someone who respects my independence, and I'm volunteering as a peer counselor for domestic violence survivors. None of that would have been possible without your willingness to see my worth when I couldn't see it myself. Thank you for helping me remember who I was and for believing I could become who I wanted to be. Your friendship changed everything. Love, Jess." Sarah hung the card on her refrigerator next to Jessica's graduation photo and a newspaper clipping about the domestic violence awareness campaign Jessica had designed for the city of Portland. Looking at these artifacts of Jessica's new life, Sarah was reminded of why she'd chosen her profession, why she continued to do this difficult work even when it was heartbreaking, even when it felt futile. Because sometimes, when the timing was right and the support was there and the survivor was ready, people could change their entire lives. They could go from victim to survivor to thriver. They could transform their pain into purpose, their trauma into strength. Jessica had done more than escape an abusive marriage. She had reclaimed herself, rebuilt her dreams, and chosen to use her experience to help others. She had turned her breaking point into her breakthrough. And Sarah had been privileged to witness it all, the fear and the courage, the despair and the hope, the ending of one life and the beginning of another. It was, she realized, the most meaningful work she could imagine doing. That night, as winter rain began to fall outside her windows, Sarah thought about all the women she'd worked with over the years, the ones who'd left and the ones who'd stayed, the ones who'd thrived and the ones who'd struggled. Each story was different, each journey unique, but Jessica's story had reminded her of something crucial. With the right support at the right moment, Anyone could choose to save themselves. Anyone could decide they deserved better. Anyone could pack their bags after dessert and walk toward a different life. The key was making sure they knew they weren't alone when they made that choice. Sarah fell asleep to the sound of rain, thinking about second chances and the courage it takes to claim them, about friendship and the power of witnessing someone's transformation, about the difference between surviving and healing, and about the remarkable strength that lives inside every person, sometimes buried, sometimes dormant, but always there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. In domestic violence work, Sarah had learned hope was both the most fragile and the most powerful force she encountered. It could be nearly destroyed, beaten down until it was barely recognizable, but it could also, under the right conditions, grow strong enough to change everything. Jessica's story was proof of that. It was a testament to the possibility of transformation, the reality of healing, and the life-changing power of refusing to give up on yourself or the people you love. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply decide you deserve better. Sometimes that decision changes everything.